Okay, a very good afternoon to you all as well as our listeners today. I'm Anindita Patnaik. I'm one of the authors of the report that we launched today. I'm a lawyer and a researcher at DAKSH. We have with us here Ms Meeran Borwankar. She is also a lawyer and she is a former officer of the Indian Police Service with extensive experience in law enforcement. She has served as the Commissioner of Police and also retired as the Director General of the BPRD, that is the Bureau of Police Research and Development. We also have with us Mr. A S Panneerselvan. He is an experienced editor and journalist. He has also served as the reader's editor for The Hindu and writes extensively about media ethics. We'll also be joined very soon by Prema Sridevi. She's an investigative journalist and the founder of The Probe, which is an independent news organization which is a part of the global slow journalism movement. Now, to quickly introduce you to our report, I'll be sharing my presentation with you and discuss the main findings of our report. Can you see my screen?
No.
Okay, hold on. Now you should be able to see it.
Yes. Now
Okay,
it
great.
is clear.
Okay. So our report is titled Ethics and Norms on Police Media and Communication. So we primarily want to address the issue of irregular reporting about the criminal justice system, the justice system in general, but particularly the criminal justice system because of sensationalist reporting. Just give me a quick minute. Prema is here and I'll try to add her. Hi Prema, welcome to the stream.
Hi, good
I just
evening.
started the
Yeah,
presentation. Yeah,
yeah,
I'll be continuing with the presentation and quickly cover our findings.
yeah.
I hope you can see my screen.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very clear.
Yes.
Okay. So the main issue with irregular reporting, especially about the criminal justice system, is that it deals with sensitive issues and basic rights of our citizenry. Most importantly, the right to a fair trial. And as we know, people are always innocent until proven guilty. However, because of extensive media coverage, sensationalism, and even fake news in this day and age, we often see that people who are under investigation in a criminal matter can be considered criminals, or at least in public view are seen as criminals, suspects, or accused. Often these words are interchanged in news reports, both written as well as visual media. This also affects the dignity and privacy not only of the accused but also associates of the accused, including their families, other people they work with. This could affect their whole lives without a conviction ever having taken place. Um, from another stakeholder point of view, any information leaked before its time through the media will affect trial, will affect successful investigation. For instance, if there is a trial, if there is a witness who has to identify, a perpetrator that he or she may have seen, and has to identify them from a lineup, it would be completely destroyed if pictures of the accused or pictures of the suspect has been published all over news channels. Then there's just a small example, but there are many other ways in which the people who are trying to be investigated by the police can find out about the details of the investigations and take reactive measures. Finally, and most importantly, which is the thrust of our the goal of our initiative, that is MARGA, which stands for Media and its role in governance and accountability, is how the media covers the justice system inherently has an effect on how the public views the justice system. And it's important for the public to trust the justice system, because if it doesn't, then there is likely to be parallel investigations, parallel trials, and not just not just mega trials, but also, extrajudicial vendetta seeking justice systems that come up, which pose a challenge and threaten law and order in the country in general. Now, to quickly give you an overview, while irregular or irresponsible reporting can come from many sources, it can be from, like if you see this framework I have here, reporters can get their information from a variety of sources. And then there's a next step of giving it to the editors, and the editors eventually forming an article or a video that will be broadcast. But to tackle one thing at a time, this particular report focuses on the specific nature of police and other law enforcement agencies as a source of information. We're going to break that down and focus on this as an attempt or as a first step to addressing the larger concern. Now, getting into the report, we conducted several interviews with various bureaucrats, police personnel, other law enforcement agencies, lawyers, and various media personnel, including editors. And we found that there was repeatedly some trends that everyone spoke about. So I've divided it into largely the kind of problems that the police face and the kind of problems that media faces. With the police, there is often like a pressure to perform, to show the public that they are doing a good job. It's also difficult for them to get a completely independent investigation without worrying about what the public thinks about them. And often before an investigation is complete, if details are leaked through the media, especially with value judgments about the quality of their investigation, it can greatly affect the work that they do. A quick example would be Arushi Talwar's case, where there were press briefings held without full facts, to the extent that sometimes if the person conducting the briefing did not even know the name of the victim correctly. So these kind of things can be avoided if there's more structured communication and an institutional way to counter this pressure. We also see that time and again a complaint that there is a lot of political influence in how investigations are conducted. They are often, the police often forms a mouthpiece or a sort of a pawn in the larger game that various political parties and their associates play. So, for instance, there have been BPRD reports and articles talking about how political interference is one of the biggest problems and hurdles to having police investigations go in an impartial and successful manner. But more specifically, with our report, often the police is instigated or directed to speak a certain way or provide a certain kind of image to the media, because when they speak to the media, they don't already have all the facts and they don't need to have a watertight case like they do before they approach a judge. So a slip here and there or a WhatsApp chat leak here and there can easily create a public image without it ever having to go to trial or stand up to the quality of evidence that typically the law would require. Finally, we have negligence, and this is a very human fact. If there isn't a clear mechanism of how to communicate with the media, there are sometimes information that is unverified or could just be peddled through personal agenda. One of the examples that we've looked at in our report is the Arun Sharma case, where a man who was trying to be, his landlady was trying to evict him in Gwalior, and she complained about him to the police, to a police personnel who she knew personally, and he was illegally detained. But the problem is that his photo, as well as various facts about him, which identify him and called him a hardened criminal, were shared with various local media outlets. And this obviously made his life extremely difficult and resulted in a vast miscarriage of justice for him. An easy way to prevent this would have been if the media outlets themselves conducted a simple verification. They would have found that there are no prior charges against him at all. In any case, these are the kinds of cases that we can see sometimes. From media, and to give credit, I mean, this is not always happens. Many a times we've also found that some of the police officers we spoke to said that they strategically release information. It may not seem like the most ethical thing in a particular context, but it is the way to communicate with certain groups of people, like for instance, in organized crime, mafia, terrorism, these sort of places, the police often use media to convey certain kinds of tactics and leaks information in order to receive information from media as well. So these are all various factors that have influenced police personnel at various times. Similarly, in the media, you also see an unhealthy set of factors, like, for instance, access journalism, especially in criminal cases. Often in the early days of a crime, the police is usually the only reliable source or a primary source of information for journalists, which means that journalists, they have a monopoly over information, and journalists have to rely on the police. If they report negatively about the police, it is likely that the police will then proceed to share further information in the case or help them in other matters. So it becomes a situation where particular journalists who are favored by certain police officers, they are the ones who get the information first. So this problem of access journalism is quite rampant. There is an unhealthy competition amongst various media houses to break news first, instead of more focus on analytical pieces or deeper dives into the criminal justice system as a whole. Particular salacious facts about cases are what make the headlines, and there is a lot of pressure on reporters to release that first, which leads to low levels of verification or negligent reporting. Finally, another complaint we've been seeing is that the beat reporters that often cover crime, and court beat reporters, they're not always trained in the principles and nuances of the legal justice system. A good example is when to call a person a suspect, when to call them a person of interest, and when to call them a criminal or even an accused. And why you can't call somebody an accused before a charge sheet is filed is not always clear to most of the reporters that work on this beat. Also, the newsroom is changing largely, with something that we'll get into further with our panelists, and how the editors manage news, especially in the day of social media, where anybody and everybody can be a source of information on the internet, makes it very difficult for reporters to stay ahead of the game and break news first. Um, Now, to quickly go into what we did, a sort of a survey, a brief overview of what is the existing regulation in this field. Now, before I get into it, we have to be clear that this is a problem we've identified, but the solution is not necessarily regulation. Nonetheless, regulation is one of the solutions that have been adopted. It's important to know what already exists before we critique it. So, when it comes to the side of the police, there are some specific orders and regulations for the police on how they can communicate with the media. There is a Ministry of Home Affairs circular, which was passed in 2010. These guidelines are largely, very brief, probably because police is a state subject, and ultimately a more tight scrutiny and regulation can only be done by the state government. Nonetheless, the central government has come out with these MHA guidelines, which have been recognized in various Supreme Court judgments as well as High Court judgments. They're simple ones, like the only designated officers can talk to the media. No unverified, half-baked, or speculative information can be released to the media, etc. Um, then we have state regulation. There are circulars and orders. Usually each state has numerous circulars and orders coming in, administrative circulars. The problem with this is that there is it's a fairly opaque process. The public usually does not know which are these circulars and what are the rules and regulations. And the importance of the public knowing what these regulations are is that it makes a reader or a consumer of news aware that something may be wrong in the news that they're reading. If a police officer is not entitled to share a certain kind of information at a certain stage of the investigation process, but this reader sees that that investigation, or that detail has come out in that stage, and they are aware that it shouldn't, then they will immediately be skeptical about that information. But because there's so much opacity on what exactly these circulars are and what are the regulations in each state, it's a huge problem to put it together, including for researchers. In fact, currently there is a case by PUCL ongoing in the Supreme Court, where each state has been asked to provide a comprehensive list of all their regulations with respect to communication with the media. But this has not been completely adhered to, and not every state has come up with all its regulations currently. The other problem is each state has a different set of regulations. There's a lack of uniformity, and nearly all of them are somewhat limited in scope. So, for instance, Madhya Pradesh has mostly regulations about how to talk about threats sexual assault victims, how to protect the identity of sexual assault victims, but not much more. On the other hand, a state like Himachal Pradesh gives a fairly detailed breakdown of the levels of officers and the various designations that exist that can talk to the media and forbids other people, other officers from talking to the media. This kind of a breakup is not there in the Madhya Pradesh rules that we found. Um, the next level problem is that even if these regulations exist, we're not sure how they're actually enforced and what disciplinary action is taken. At least in the circulars that we have seen, the circular itself does not specify what the punishment would be if there's a breach of this and how to identify it. Finally, we have CBI. Uh, and one second. Finally, we have CBI guidelines. CBI guidelines are fairly sophisticated in comparison to the regulations I just mentioned. They, but obviously, they are limited in scope because they apply only to the CBI. But it's interesting to see the kind of safety measures they've adopted. Typically, they relate to corruption cases where higher officials and politicians will be investigated, and so that the CBI is very rigid in terms of what it can say to the media unless there's some substantial evidence against the person, which in this case would be a high profile government official. So these better sets of or more sophisticated sets of rules, so to speak, seems to be applicable to protect one's own, and a similar set of civil standards is not maintained for the common citizen. We also see that CBI has thought about correcting information which it sees in media which may be incorrect, and maintaining the image that the public perceives. This is a fairly good idea, and I think that we should try to see how other state outfits, other state and police and law enforcement outfits can proactively start correcting information, which now is beginning to happen with social media. But it's not an institutionalized mechanism, and slowly just disparate disparate practices across the country that we see. Now, quickly moving on to the regulatory landscape of the media. Media is very minimally regulated, and correctly so, because of free speech. Nonetheless, there are a few statutory guidelines here and there, like some provisions of the IPC, like Section 228A, which protects the identity of victims of sexual assault, where none of their identifying information can be revealed. Also, Juvenile Justice Act prevents children in conflict with with the law from being exposed on news outlets. Primarily, there is also some semi-government regulation, like the Press Council of India, which is headed by a retired judge and 28 other members, as well as I mean, they've come out with norms of journalistic conduct, and the cable television network regulations also exist, and they've come out with the program code. But the problem with these regulations are that they are very slow to be adopted, I mean enforced. In a reporting cycle, when a particular piece of information is seen to be problematic, if a complaint is filed, by the time it's corrected and apology is sent, that piece of news has lost its relevance and no one is really reading it anymore. um, the other problem is that uh, they, each of these regulations cover different types of media, so there are differential regulations depending on the medium. So Press Council of India, for instance, only covers written media and doesn't cover electronic media or TV. But cable television, on the other hand, has the opposite effect. The rules it has doesn't apply to press. And also, the way it can be enforced, these regulations can be enforced, is problematic. Whereas in the Press Council, maybe there can be a missive, where in cable television network rules, the channel itself can be blocked. So there's a huge disparity in the severity of the action that can be taken. Finally, there is self regulation, which we will talk to our panelists about further. Self regulation is perhaps the best method to go forward, but it is quite uh, limited as of now. The way it is practiced is limited. Often the organizations or bodies that issue these guidelines, like the National Broadcasting Standards Authority or the Indian Broadcast Foundation, these guidelines are quite extensive, nearly cover a wide variety of problems, but they don't exactly address how to get information from the police. They do give guidelines on how to present that information once obtained. And even then, the regulations can't really be enforced, because the errant entity would simply just cease to be a member of that foundation, But since these are self-regulatory bodies, it only applies to their own members. Finally, I'll just conclude quickly with some of the recommendations that we had in mind, but we intend to discuss it much more now. One is to update the police guidelines. This is easily done because there are numerous other jurisdictions that we've seen which have a more detailed and structured way of communication. For instance, having a dedicated press cell, having people trained to communicate a particular way with the media, have capacity building for the police, where the values that are to be protected that we covered in the beginning of this presentation, like the right to fair trial or the right to privacy, these are the values that need to be protected. So if a value-based education is provided to them and the police guidelines are changed to reflect these values, then it's less likely to be a rule-based method and more likely to be a situation where each police personnel can assess whether what they're going to say upholds the value or takes away from it and accordingly make a decision. We also want to see how a more lasting solution, which is to empower citizens themselves. Now, we can only go so far when we consider a protectionist environment where we keep trying to filter the kind of news that reaches people, and more build an atmosphere where people can then educate themselves, find various sources of information. For example, we can think about the police actively tweeting or using social media to directly inform the citizenry, so that the citizens can then assess what they read in the news and compare it to what the police are saying to them. Finally, we also think that there needs to be significant discussion around ethics, because ultimately regulations only go so far. We want to think about peer respect and pressure as a way to control behavior, because the police have pride in their work, the media professionals have pride in theirs, and it's only the way their peers look at them that will ultimately regulate how they respond. So we're going to talk some more about how to build that culture. Quickly now, I will switch over to our panelists and start our discussion. Now, I'm going to be asking a few questions to each of our panelists, but please feel free to jump in wherever you want to. The themes are broad, and we really would like to see how you'd interact with each other. To start off, I'd like to address Ms. Borwankar. Our research shows that there are various kinds of situations in which police leak information. And when I say leak, I mean information that is released while a case is ongoing. Which may or may not be correct, but there could be an individual doing it who has refused to listen to the order of his or her superior, or it could be a coordinated effort where the entire department wants to leak a particular piece of information for whatever reason. Now, I wanted to know, once it is done, how seriously is it taken? What sort of action is taken against these errant police officers, and is disciplinary action a viable method to deal with this?
She has to unmute, please.
Thank you. Most of the police investigation cases do not require secrecy or confidential information. The ones which require, like the identity of a suspect, which if leaked would harm my case of investigation. My experience is that officers follow the rules strictly, and they uh, the, because each case is investigated by a team, so the team leader ensures that that information doesn't go out because it will adversely affect his or her investigation. It's only cases where lot many crime, like riot has taken place, and you are trying to arrest a few people, then their names leak. So I would like to differentiate between individual single cases and group cases. Most of the time information gets leaked in the group cases, and it's very difficult to pinpoint who leaked it, because it's not one team which is investigating that case. It becomes local police, CID, maybe some team sent from head office. So in group cases, leakage of information is more. In individual cases, information leakage is less. Disciplinary action is very difficult because it's reporters, the crime reporter with whom the information is shared is true to his informant, and the police officer is true to his source. So disciplinary action is very difficult. If identified, definitely action is taken. That is more if we have our own officers under surveillance, one. And secondly, you talked of various government rules, but one thing which your study should have undertaken is we have very strong conduct rules both in the center and in the state government. Those conduct rules bar us. Like today, post retirement, I am taking part of your discussion. I am sure you try any IPS officer, he or she will not come for discussions because of the conduct rules. So the study should have also had a copy of this conduct rule released by the government of India and by the state government. So uh, uh, they also put pressure on us. But of course, seepage, leakage, sharing of information, unethical leakage of information, that's a serious issue.
Yes, madam. But if we think about like cases where there are pictures of the officers along with the criminals next to them, or like a haul that has happened with before the investigation is complete, it seems to indicate that largely there is a sort of acceptance that it's okay to release such information. But do they follow a certain guideline? Do they have to check? Do they have to ensure they get permission to release this? Usually, it's happening with the
Absolutely. No, no, absolutely. In fact, wherever the information or photographs, it's very easy to identify and pinpoint who released those photographs. And if you see all the photographs where identification parade is yet to be conducted by a magistrate, they
correct.
cover the face of the accused. So that system has evolved where they feel there is no need, the name of the accused is already well known, his identity is disclosed, maybe they have photograph with them. And yes, while releasing photographs, permission is taken. But wherever identification parade has yet to be conducted, I am watching media, they cover the face of the accused.
Right. An interesting point you mentioned is that of a police source and how important it is to maintain the identity of a source. And I mean, I understand that there must be a conflict because sometimes police needs to whistleblow about the situation that's going on, and maybe they don't agree, they don't think it's conscionable as to what his larger team is doing, but they may release into the media, and the purpose of transparency is still met. So in this sort of a situation, even though the rule may stop him or her from revealing information, a larger ethical question or obligation may encourage him or her to do so. So in that context, Prema, do you think, like, when you work with police informants, how do you balance, like, since they are giving you this sort of information, do you have a filtering or mechanism to ensure that the information that they give you is ethically presented? And also, as an editor, the reporters that work under you, how do you ensure that that quality is maintained?
Prema has also unmute yourself.
I'm sorry about that. Yeah. So as journalists, we are trained to whenever we do a story, we have to cross-check, multiple check, and verify our information from various sources. So we do this as a practice, and over a period of time, with experience, this just becomes a habit. But if you ask me, should police media interactions be regulated completely? I will say no, because all investigative journalists during multiple occasions in our careers, we have been able to succeed or get leads on some stories because some police officials somewhere decided to place their trust on us and give us tip offs or leads. So this communication is very essential between the police officer and an investigative journalist or a crime reporter. So there are positives, there are negatives when it comes to police media interactions. For instance, I can tell you about one of the cases that I was covering when I did the Sunanda Pushkar story. There was a source in the police department who gave me information, who gave me the entire file notings of the Delhi police on how the Delhi police was botching up the Sunanda Pushkar case. So all this was there. It was a matter of internal police records. There were a lot of comments made by senior police officials. Now, he would have lost his job for parting with this sensitive information, but he still did it. So I kind of call him a good Samaritan who went beyond his call of duty and he became a whistleblower. Now, the result of this kind of an interaction between this is not a formal interaction. This is an off-record interaction between a
Yeah.
police official and a journalist. Now, the final result of this, after we did the story, the top cop in Delhi ordered action against the police officials who were watching up the case. There was an inquiry. Certain police officials faced action. So I feel so when such cases are covered, it is a duty of the reporter to protect his or her source. If you can't, then don't be a journalist. Don't do the story. Um, the other example I can give is, now let's say if a state home minister's son is involved in a rape case, and the minister uses his power to get the case botched up by way of putting political pressure or some sort of a pressure on the department head. And if someone within the police department, let's say one of the officials who's dealing with the case, secretly leaks this information to the media, and because of this information, tomorrow if the victim gets justice, can you blame the reporter
Mm-hmm.
or the whistleblower or the
Hmm.
whistleblowing police official? So these are some exceptional cases where I think in the interest of justice, in public interest, certain things take place. As a reporter, it's our duty to get information and not just play propaganda. So when we say police media interaction needs to be regulated, what we must mean is that the steps that we take to ensure fake news or propaganda is not being circulated, the steps that we take to protect the identity of the victims, the steps we must take to ensure that the accused have a right to fair trial. This is what we must focus on. At the same time, we must not do anything that hampers press freedom or public interest journalism.
Yeah, I understand. So this is one type of source that you're talking about. The other common way is a press release or a press briefing. So, madam, what do you think? Do you feel that usually in like the jurisdictions that we have studied, like the UK, have a dedicated press cell for each department? Now, I understand that's quite resource intensive and maybe difficult in a in a situation where they're already having a resource crunch, and they also need to be trained in public relations. Do you think it's a practical possibility to have dedicated press cells and run story ideas by them every time and have a more structured dialogue with the media in a constant and sustained basis?
Is this question to me, Anandita?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, and yes, we must have that. You read out about CBI's very professional attitude
Sorry.
in having information officers, and in fact, they get from, I think, Indian Information Service. They get officers who are trained how to deal with media, and I've also worked in CBI, so I know that that agency has, in a way, uh, kept the decorum, released the relevant information, and has been able to avoid undue controversies. But about Prema ma'am's case about this Sunanda Pushkar, as a working police officer at that time, I knew media has gone overboard. It's trying to wear uniform where it should not, and they have absolutely no knowledge how investigation goes, and that's why the case did not even get charged in the court. And let me ask, how many press reporters knew what is the difference between charge not being framed, which means there was zero evidence, and this case rocked the country. And various other cases of Mumbai, like the suicide by Sushant Rajput, the recent arrest of Shah Rukh Khan's son. I feel sometimes, in one case, yes, maybe the NCRB is making internal inquiries, but I request appear for All India services, wear this uniform, either of state police or of IPS, and then then investigate in a legal manner. My God, India went crazy about cases like Sunanda Pushkar, which to a police officer like me was a simple case of drug overdose, and therefore When I used to discuss with my friend, and incidentally, Sunanda Mehta is the one who wrote about Sunanda Pushkar. She was resident editor of Indian Express in Pune, where I was the commissioner of police. So when we discussed the case, I told her charges will not be framed in this case. She would not. Initially, she just would not believe. So my request is, I agree with Prema that there should be very free flowing information sharing where it is possible, where it is not adversely affecting investigation. But in other cases, sharing of files, like she's saying that senior officers notings were shared, I consider it extremely unethical, and we should not encourage this.
Yeah, I would just like to butt in. No, I agree with Borwankar ji when you say that you should not be the judge and jury. So I also agree when in cases like Sushant Singh Rajput, or in cases like Sunanda Pushkar, even before a trial, someone is charged. If you're calling that person a murderer, or if you're calling it a suicide or a murder, even before it has been proved in a court of law, that part I completely agree. But sometimes it is also with the police officer, in if the police officials, if they don't want to present the evidence before the court, if they are not botching it up within themselves. For instance, in this particular case, I know that nothing has happened in the court, but in the run up to this entire case, there are people who have conducted postmortems who have said that I have been pressurized by the then health minister. I have been pressurized by the main person involved in this case. There are police official record. There are records of internal file notings of the police department, which says that our own police department has been botching up this entire case. They have taken the entire evidence and given it to a particular family member so that he can get it deleted, and when we got it back, this appeared to be deleted. So there are multiple evidence in this particular case which proves that something really went wrong. But at the end of the day, if the police is not filing a proper charge sheet, then obviously we will not get we will not get justice. In the sense, the victim will not get justice. So it is like, it's very difficult to say anything solely based on what is happening in a court of law. It is the responsibility of the police officials to do their duty, and also media also to build pressure. But while media builds pressure, it's very important to not resort to media trial and not cross the Lakshman Rekha that most do. Yeah.
No,
The
I think
fact
that
that
lively
even charge
discussion.
was not
Okay.
framed, I rest my case.
Yeah.
See, if I could just butt in here, but I think that this conversation that we are having is very like symbolic of how these two pillars of the institution should be. I think the media and the police should ideally be questioning each other and testing each other's boundaries,
Yeah.
because that is the way the democracy is meant to function. But the important part is that both are independent institutions, and the importance is to maintain this independence rather than play into any sort of pressure. And with that, I would want to ask my next question to Mr. Paneer. Since you work so much with journalistic ethics, do you feel that ultimately it's not the regulation that matters so much, but something that needs to be done where the individuals within this profession, journalists, be it journalists, I mean, in your case, you would have more knowledge about that, who have like a common code of what is right and what is wrong. So it's mostly more an ethical question than whether they're breaking a regulation or not. In how do you think that sort of ethics can be preserved?
See, I think it's better to get into examples. One is when we
Sure,
came
sure.
into journalism, that year was the Bhiwandi riots. And our editor at the time, Vinod Mehta, called the team and said that he doesn't want anybody who's covering police to cover that riots. There were actually two people who were doing business reporting and international affairs landed in Burundi to cover, because he felt that if somebody from the police is going to cover, he or she is going to get in touch with the Assistant Commissioner of Police, and the Assistant Commissioner of Police viewpoint is going to be the report. And he says that anyhow, that is going to be the report in PTI. And if we want to know multiple voices, people at some level, you spoke about access journalism. Another level, having not having access actually gives access to voices. Having access gives relationship to the people who are plugged in. Having not having access is actually giving access to multiple voices. Therefore, that's what Vinod Mehta did. In fact, if you look back, if you look at that Sunday Observer's reportage of the Bhiwandi riots, it had a far more detailed documentation of that one than anybody else. You can actually take Times of India, you can take Midday, you can take all the newspapers which came around that time. And this stood out because it genuinely managed to gather voices. It was not amplifying the entrenched voices. The entrenched voices can be investigators, entrenched voices can be prosecutors, entrenched voices can be anybody. But entrenched voices do get their space, but that is just one element. There are things which is going beyond entrance voices. And second is, have we done enough study to understand these question of privacy and dignity which you spoke about? For instance, there is a Supreme Court case on the Nira Radia issue, which was filed by the Tata Trust
Yes.
about the privacy. And that case is yet to come up. Until date, we don't know who leaked Nira Radia tapes. And the Nira Radia tapes led to regime change. Nira Radia tape led to a complete change in our telecom regulatory framework. It brought in a completely different set of political reality. And it's a case which has been filed by the most powerful corporate company of this country called Tatas. And for that, we are yet to find out. Therefore, at some level, the power of the entrenched institutions to leak and not to reveal who is leaking is extremely powerful. It starts from the PMO and it comes down to the Supreme Court's Chief Justice. It spreads across all the powerful because we have permitted this idea of non-attributable sources news to be published. As long as we are saying that it is from a reliable source, we publish it. We don't insist on people to own up their news. Unless and otherwise, we journalists are able to exercise that power. Say that if you want us to carry this story, you own up. We are not able to say it to any of our big ministers or to big bureaucrats or to our big diplomats. Diplomats have planted stories, bureaucrats have planted stories, investigative officers have planted stories, and judicial seniors have planted stories. It's not new. Planting stories have been happening. It's as old as journalism itself. Therefore, that's not the question is: do we have a system of verification and cross verification? When Prema was talking about I check and I verify, that's the only protection what we have, because at the end of the day journalism is a act of verification. If we are able to verify, then we have the right to put it out in the public domain. But the
But
question of trusting is becoming such a endemic one, and it is so powerful because if I am not going to take it, somebody else is going to take it. Remember with the radio tapes, what happened? Every newspaper got those tapes. Yeah, it was listed. It said that from this minute to this minute, it was so and so. From this minute to this minute, it was so and so. It was tabulated, which means somebody is. Therefore, there is a vested interest which is at work. Therefore, we know that all these institutions have factional, competitive factional interest which is at work. And media is also working within that environment. In that sense, media is not immune to this type of pressure. But only thing what we expect from media is media following the first rule of journalism, that is the act of verification. Do we verify? Are we sure of what we are putting out in the public domain? That is the first question. And the second question for me, which is much more difficult, is while we all support the idea of self regulation, we don't invest any money in having a self regulatory mechanism within media. As regulatory mechanism needs a forum for course correction, and that forum for course correction should be visible. For instance, in the Hindu, my job was a visible mending mechanism. The way if somebody had some problem with the Hindu report, they could write to me. I investigated, and if the reader was right, we said that the reader is right. And if the paper was wrong, we said the paper was wrong. There was a dedicated space where the correction was done. Therefore, for the self regulation to work, we need a visible mending mechanism. Unfortunately, while we talk about the need for a self regulatory mechanism, we hardly invest to create a visible self regulatory mechanism within media. Therefore, after 1991, when Indian media actually expanded in a completely different speed, because till then, the total turnover of media was less than 1,700 crores, and today it's about nearly lakh and 90,000 crores. Therefore, you can see the huge change between 1991 and today. And despite such a huge expansion, have we investing on the idea of self-regulation? It's very, very important that we shouldn't have an external regulation, because external regulation will become a arm of the state. But to reconcile freedom and responsibility, we need an institutional framework within each media house. And that's where I think that
That's true, because once the Hindu started the reader's editor, then other larger news agencies thought about, I mean, news organizations thought about a similar setup. But just to go back to one thing, the first rule of journalism being verification, I want to go a step further than that and ask you, okay, if you see something is correct, it may be verified. Is there not an obligation to think about, should it still be put out there? Is it just
yes,
factual
no, there
correctness
are two
that
things. One
matters?
is, see, journalism is an interlocking public. One is publishing truth, another one is minimizing harm. Just because something is true, we are not going to publish it if it is going to grievously harm our social fiber. Therefore, the idea is truth is very, very important, and truth is a great defense for good journalism. But truth cannot permit me to destroy or harm something. Therefore, minimizing harm is a integral part of good journalism. Therefore, minimizing harm and truth have to go hand in hand. That's the reason we always talk about balance between freedom and responsibility, balance between truth and minimizing harm. All these things come in. And one of the reasons when we came up with this old guidelines of not naming the communities during a communal riot is essentially to minimize harm. Therefore, minimizing harm is a integral part of good journalism. And I don't think we can imagine good journalism without integrating and understanding this as an integral and intrinsic value of good journalism.
Yes. I'm glad you said that, because we so often focus on just getting facts right that we forget that there is a higher calling of, you know, preserving the true values of a democracy, which need not always be served by the truth. It's a difficult question to grapple with. But that brings me back finally to the point of educating the people in these institutions. It could even be the people reading the newspaper or reading or watching the news. Um, we can also look at it from the point of view of the police, right? So uh, Ms. Borwankar, do you remember what your training was like, or are you in touch with how officers are trained today? Are they taught these values, and do you think it's adequate, the training mechanism on how to communicate with the media or any entity on the work that they do? Like you said, if it's a no, there's the no charge sheet, then you shouldn't be talking about it. That's one way to look at it. But is this something you've evolved through experiences, or do officers get trained to think like this?
So, as far as the legal process is concerned, what is framing of charge, what is getting a case discharged at the charge framing stage, trial, benefit of doubt, clean acquittal, conviction, training all over from sub inspector to the IPS level. We are very well trained. Communication, I would say, in Indian Police Service, we are trained very well. But I think at the sub inspector level, at the DYSP level, maybe all states can do, like your study has pointed out, that the communication strategies are different, say in Himachal and Madhya Pradesh, which you quoted. Maybe we can have more training and more clear cut instructions about communication with the media. But yes, I also agree with you that we have to make the listeners, the consumers, aware of the need to go for truth and not for controversy. I feel at the moment in India, journalism is thriving on the basis of controversies than a paper like Hindus. You know how, what is the readership of Hindu? That is the real uh, thinking readership which is looking for truth. But my feeling is that most of the reader is going in for superficial headlines. And yes, we have to create more awareness amongst them, and also better communication strategy for police officers and government servants.
We have about 4 minutes left. So if any of you have, any comments to add, please do so.
See, personally speaking, for me, the key question is investing in human resources. What is happening within
Capacity.
journalism is that we are not investing enough in having domain expertise. For instance, when
Yeah.
I came to journalism, my newspaper, that is Hindu, used to have about 20 international correspondents. Today we have four. After retirement of my friend Ram Reddy, Indian newspaper doesn't have a macroeconomic editor. We are outsourcing knowledge. Therefore, if we were, I don't have a diplomatic huge team. Therefore, if there is something on diplomacy, what we tend to do is we tend to get former ambassadors to speak. If we want to know about sports, we are getting former cricketers to come and speak. If we want to talk about um, the changes in the administrative mechanisms, you get hold of the former cabinet secretary to come and speak, which means we are not investing adequately in the domain expertise. If I'm going to have a person who is trained enough and who can actually challenge, say, the chairman of a bank or the ambassador of a neighboring country on the foreign relationship, that means there is an institutional investment on domain expertise. What we are witnessing today is that post digital explosion, the investment has come down primarily because there is a squeeze in the revenue, and the squeeze in the revenue is getting manifested in different manner. Well, what we are witnessing is that there is a enormous outsourcing of uh, expertise. What you find is quite a lot of people from within the sector are writing about it. Of
Yeah,
course, people from within the sector bring in certain amount of knowledge, but it doesn't mean that they are a disinterested or a person with sufficient distance. They are still an interested party. The difference is when Ram Reddy was handling macroeconomic affairs for the Hindu. He was not trying to become the chief economic advisor to the government of India. But if I am interested in becoming a chief economic advisor to the government of India, my approach is going to be different. When we came to journalism, we were at a briefing in Delhi, and in that they said that if a Supreme Court judge is going to keep talking about Article 19 repeatedly, it means that he or she is going to retire, and they are angling to become the chairman of the Press Council of India. And they said that if a Supreme Court judges keep talking about Article 21, the person is going to retire and angling for the National Human Rights Commission's chairmanship, which means there is an element of post-retirement linkages there. And that's the reason it's so important to develop domain expertise within media. And to develop that domain expertise within the media, we need resources. And that is the key question.
Okay, just to interrupt you, I'm no Prema, you have a point, but Ms. Borwankar needs to leave. So, thank you very much for your suggestion on the conduct rules. We'll definitely look into how that can also be used to deal specifically with the problem of media communication. We can continue the discussion, but thank you so much for your time, Ms. Borwankar.
Thank you.
Prema, you had something to add?
Yeah, I completely agree with Panneerselvan ji when he says that we are outsourcing knowledge and expertise. Because I remember when I started off my career in journalism, um, there were so many beats. There was environment beat, there was a human resource development beat, a separate
Mhm.
education beat, there was a municipal corporation beat. People would
Okay.
just go and do citizen shows. Yeah, there were so many beats, and but now in our journalism circles we only have three important beats. One is political beat, entertainment beat, and crime beat, because these are the beats that get the TRPs. These are the beats that gets the eyeballs and gets the money, and this usually happens in television channels than in the print. In the print also this happens, but not to
Print,
that extent.
print media.
Yeah. Now the point I'm trying to make is, for instance, let's just take the legal beat. We've spoken about this before. If you're taking the legal beat, earlier we used to have legal reporters, very senior legal reporters, who would go to district courts, sessions court, Supreme Court, who would stay there from morning till evening and relentlessly cover issues. But now we don't have such legal reporters. Most of my legal beat colleagues in the media have lost jobs, or they have been pushed into lifestyle reporting, or some have made it big in political coverage. They don't do legal reporting anymore, most of my friends. you know or senior
Mhm.
legal reporters who got higher salaries, their salaries have been cut, they've been pushed to the corner to do other works. And how does a media organization get legal information? Because they're cutting down on cost, and they are completely monitoring live law and bar and bench. Now, I really feel that when you're outsourcing your legal reportage, and when you're sitting and focusing on Twitter feeds from Live Law and Bar and Bench, recently I saw one of these organizations looking for interns. Now you can imagine that what if tomorrow these organizations are going to be filled with interns? What about the quality of reporting, not only in their organizations but the entire media, like most of the media which is doing this, following Live Law and Bar and Bench for information? I think this is very suicidal for the media. So I really feel that if you're calling a beat reporter and if you're assigning that reporter a beat, you should allow him to go to the beat, him or her to go to the beat, stay there in the beat. And also, when you focus on live law or bar and bench or leaflet, the problem is legal reporting is not just about reporting blow by blow account of the observations of a judge, or reporting the orders of a court. In legal reporting, what we do is we go to the courts, we try and meet the lawyers, we try and talk to the accused if possible, we try and speak to the victims, we try and look for leads. Morning till evening, a reporter is there, nosing around trying to get some information. That's what helps the reporter to break stories. So I'm just seeing that all these beats, important beats, are disintegrating, and there is no expertise. Somebody who does legal today will do defense tomorrow, will do health day after tomorrow, and will do rocket science after that, you know. So that, I think it's very problematic.
Uh,
See, essentially,
you know that
journalism.
actually, yeah, sure. Go ahead, Mr. Paneer.
See, essentially, what we have to understand is journalism travels on two tracks. One track is called bearing witness, another track is called making sense. Therefore, unless and otherwise you have a team of reporters who are reporting on what is happening, you're not going to have expert analysts and the edit page writers who are going to help you to make sense. Therefore, one has to complement the other. Now, what we are witnessing is that bearing witness element has come down to a bare minimum. Look at our prime time. None of our prime time we have reportage have any reportage. It's essentially debate
On events.
on events. Therefore, you can't make sense without knowing what has happened. Hence, unless and otherwise we bring back this balance between reportage and making sense. Yes, analytical report writing has a space. Nobody denies it. Data journalism has its wonderful role, but all those things are going to gain edge only when we start reporting. And reporting needs money. The idea
That
is you
actually brings
can't.
me to the point of sorry to interrupt, but this is a question we were also dealing with. We realize there's a lot of political pressure on the police, but there's also so much pressure on the media because of this ownership element that you talk about. There's this organization called Media Ownership Monitor, and they try to see how the big media houses are owned and who owns them. Do you think that the skewed effect of how much political associates and business magnates own media now, does that make a difference in the newsroom?
Yes, it is a universal phenomenon. The thing is, uh, there is a big study which was done by the Tau Center. Uh, Here, the key question is how do we look at something called the digital disruption or the digital empowerment? When the internet started spreading, we all thought about internet as a digital empowerment. Only by 2011-12, we realized the power of the Silicon Valley majors, and we are now talking about digital disruption. For us, it took nearly a decade to understand the shift in this language from digital empowerment to digital disruption. The key question here is the amount of money which the media industry is attracting today is huge, but that money is not coming as media support. That money is coming in as stake. People buy controlling rights. Apparently, lakh and 20,000 crores have come into Indian media in the last 10 years. And in the what does it mean? It means that TV18 is today the India's largest media organization. And TV18 doesn't need profit. It doesn't need sustainability. It can afford to be a huge drain on somebody's resources because that's not going to alter its economic stability. Imagine can a small district newspaper follow the TV18 example? And that is the key question. And the key question along with this is the shift in the political economy of the news organization. 90% of the broadcast industry, I'm not going to get into other industries at this stage. Well, let's just look at broadcast and digital two platforms. One with the broadcast is 90% of the money is going towards carriage fees. That is, people are paying for their DTH operators, they are paying for their MSO operators, they for their cable TV operators. That is a substantial money. News gathering is less than 10% of their overall cost. And next thing is, none of these carriages are neutral carriages. If you are thinking of a carriage like, say, a power grid doesn't discriminate. Prema can generate hydel power, you can generate nuclear power, I can generate hydropower, and if we give it to the grid doesn't discriminate. It carries it as power. But with the ISP operators and with our digital platform operators, which is being controlled by algorithms, there is a very, very clear, skewed leeway. Therefore, the carriage itself controls the content. Therefore, content is the prisoner of the carriage. The moment the carriage has become so powerful, where content has become the prisoner of the carriage, we are looking at a new reality. And for that new reality, I think we should look at the issues governing these carriages. How neutral are these carriages? How are we going to
There
make
are
these
numerous
carriages?
corporate interests at play, is what you're referring to. That not just the
Yes,
ownership, but also of the medium through which media, I mean, through which news is
exactly.
disseminated. So, multitude of corporate
And the
interests
problem
and
is
also
that
media
this
people.
excess centralization becomes extremely dangerous only when the state becomes terribly hostile to a particular region or a particular IP cluster. Like what happened after the article abrogation of the Article 370. Internet was shut down in Kashmir. You can't become a digital only country and shut off the internet. Therefore, this excess centralization of information is also making state more powerful than what we are willing to concede. The state, if it wants, can switch off the complete flow of information, and that's what happened with the for Jammu and Kashmir immediately after the abrogation of the Article 370. For 4.5 months, no information, and we are supposed to be digital first country, a digital first country which is shutting off its internet completely. There was this mode of reaching information is also another key question. That's the reason sometimes I think it is important to have some sort of an analog footprints along with our digital initiatives where one can complement the other and where one cannot be subsumed by the other. Can we work on some sort of an analog digital uh, joint venture to restore democratic information space? That's has been my concern.
Mhm. And also to attract funding for a more sophisticated self-regulatory mechanism. Both
Yes,
are problems that we need to address
yes.
funding wise. Those are interesting points actually. So if we have any other input, Prema, would you like to say anything?
Prema, you have to
Yeah, you're
unmute
mute.
yourself.
So I would like to just add that if you walk, when you walk into a big media organization, when you see a posh office, I have come from those places, so I'm just telling you. Now as an independent journalist running a startup, I realize, when you walk into a big media organization, the first thing that comes to my mind is who's paid this money, how much is the rent, how is the media organization covering this cost, how many people are there, how many people's salaries are being paid monthly, what is the amount that the organization has to pay, where is this cost coming from. And you will see, if you look at an independent digital media news organization's office, it's usually very small. We initially operated from a 690 square feet office, very small one. They would say, our your reporters would say, shuru hote hi khatam ho jata hai, khatam ho jata hai office. And then we moved on to a slightly larger 2,500 square feet office. But this funding comes from reader revenue. It's not from any political house or a corporate house or something like that. I think that is the future of journalism. When you say ownership, when people start paying for news, they start paying for content that they see value in, which makes journalists work harder because they know that they can't dish out the same thing. They can't rehash stories. We've seen journalists, what they, some journalists, most of the journalists in news organizations, they take a PTI copy, idhar se udhar kar diya, first headline thoda change kar diya, angle thoda badal diya, you know, and rehash a story, give it slightly different angle, and just keep on putting content, quantity upon quantity. So, but I really think that this is
Yeah.
not the future of journalism. Advertiser revenues are shrinking, but if you look at the subscription or membership model of news, slowly it's, slowly and steadily it's increasing. People are willing to pay for good content.
Yeah.
So I feel that there should be a focus, relentless focus. Anybody who wants to do journalism should, or start a journalism organization, should look at the subscription based model. It's going to be slow, growth is going to be slow, but it is going to give a lot of satisfaction, not only to the readers but also to the journalists who are covering the stories.
Yeah. I think, that actually ties up quite well with our point, which was that, somewhere the source of ethics has to come from somewhere. That's what we were looking for in this entire discussion, both for the police as well as for the media. But you're right in that that source may just be the readership. The citizens stop wanting salacious news, stop trusting, badly written articles, then they're likely to be less of them. So it's really an empowered and aware citizenry that will be the ultimate solution, I suppose. So hopefully our report will be one such endeavor that will educate more people, who will then consume better media and allow for better communication with the police, who then will have less takers for leaking badly leaked information or badly portrayed information. So, with that, I end this discussion. Thank you so much for joining us. And if interested, if anybody wants to have a copy of the report, you can reach it in our website. If you want to know anything about the way we conducted our research and our methodology, you can contact me. And my email ID is also available on the website of DAKSH. I should also mention that Prema was one of our researchers and a co-author of our report, so you can also reach out to her. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Paneer. And hopefully, we can do better conversations around this topic and live in a slightly better world the next time we speak. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.